Good morning. In the words of the immortal newsman Marvin Gaye, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. So will Sean and Dan. Welcome to the morning meeting. This program is based on the television network news division's morning meetings. We'll run through the day book, tell you what we think, and then we want to know what you think. If you're here on the two-way platform, please raise your electronic hand. That's the yellow thing. If you're watching on YouTube or X, please don't put smack in the chat. MAGA folks in particular, last couple days, horrible. If you want to write stuff in there, express your thoughts, great. But please, no gang, thug, good people on both sides mentality. Please, just really good people on both sides. Thank you for joining and expressing your thoughts with peace, love, and understanding. Here's what's happening today. Big day on Capitol Hill as we head towards the climactic showdown between Speaker Johnson and his own herd of cats about whether they can pass budget instructions on reconciliation. We'll talk about the latest on that. But 9 o'clock at this hour, both parties in the House meeting privately. Afterwards, the Speaker and his leadership team will have a press conference. Also at 10, Senate Financial Services holds a hearing on confronting China. Noon, House Democratic leadership have their press conference. 12:45, both parties in the Senate side have their weekly lunches. 1 o'clock, Hakeem Jeffries, another press conference, this time focusing on the budget. Budget votes expected in the afternoon and then the early evening, assuming they keep on schedule. 2 o'clock, Senate Judiciary hearings on birthright citizenship and the weaponization of the Justice Department. Then at 2:15, the Doge Conference has a press conference. Meanwhile, at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, President Trump, as of this writing, has a very limited schedule. It could expand. At 3, he's supposed to sign executive orders in the Oval Office, currently closed press. Speaker Johnson just reaffirmed that they will vote tonight. Of course, he could change his mind. And then at 1 o'clock earlier, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt holds a press conference. Don't know what the vice president's doing because that's just the way we roll here. All right, gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for coming and being part of the morning meeting. Again, if you want in on the conversation, please raise your hand.
Mark, I have a question. Have any executive orders actually been privately signed so
yeah,
far?
there was at least one day where they were privately signed, although he came out afterwards and talked about them.
But, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think there was one at the White House that was private, but it's same thing. He talked about it later in the day. Sean, where are you currently on whether the speaker is going to get the votes either today or as I think you said yesterday, by the end of the week?
So to me, this is an attendance game. He's down 3 right now. Burchett, I don't think folds. Tim Burchett just doesn't fold. Spartz, I think, can get bought off. Probably not for that much. And then Tom Massey is another one. I just don't see how he gets there. So I think this is going to come down to do they get the sense that there's a Democrat that's sick or something like that or traveling, because you got 1 to give and you're down technically 3, but I think you can get it down to 2. I'm conflicted right now.
Let me ask you a question about Burchett. He seems to love Donald Trump. He talks about Donald Trump all the time in his public appearances. Isn't that a case where Donald Trump could just call him and say, my whole presidency's on the line. This is just an initial vote, all the normal things. Like, why would Burchett be uniquely unturnable with pressure from the president?
I think I saw this the first term on healthcare. A bunch of these guys, actually it was Mark Meadows and a couple others, basically said, like, we love you, Mr. President, but we just philosophically, this is the wrong move. And we're actually trying to protect you. I think that's going to be the play. Get him on the phone with him. But Massey, to me, is a no, like, you're not going to flip him. Burchett, if there's one that you could make that case to and say, listen, just let's get it to the Senate. Let's fight it out. That's why I'm saying I'm conflicted. I think if Trump picks up the phone today and squeezes him and says, you say you love me, this is when you got to show it. I need this vote. We can't look weak. The Democrats will seize it. The Senate will roll you. You're going to end up with a worse deal. So I think but that's why I'm saying math, because if the Democrats are down a vote and they don't need them, they'll go. Otherwise, it's just, you're going to work him all day.
Yeah, I think Massey's unturnable, but Burchett is turnable.
Dan. I mean, yeah, it's Spartz is the easiest.
Yeah.
Burchett's the second, but Burchett, the delta between 2 and 3 is tough. I mean, I think Sparks, respectfully, is not exactly the toughest sell.
Yeah,
It's
I
one
agree.
phone
I
call
agree.
and a lollipop.
I agree exactly. Dan.
The thing about you don't want to be the one person blocking it, because then Trump will come with full force. And if Massey wants to run for the Senate too, it's an interesting thing if he would be the one to kind of completely block it. But I think they get there because he's kicking the can down the road. He's telling the moderates, look, we're not going to touch Medicaid. It seems like, and Sean, kudos to you for telegraphing this. I think it was 2 weeks ago. They're just they're going to call it waste, fraud, and abuse savings in Medicaid and Medicare, not cuts, and see if they can kind of thread that political needle. And it seems like some moderates are on board with that. And then I think on the conservative side, it was interesting to see Jim Jordan come out and really say, look, we're cutting spending, we're cutting taxes, we're increasing on energy, immigration, and defense. And he's like, that sounds conservative to me. I think Trump ultimately gets him on board. His economic numbers are coming down. They need this. They need to show some
the other thing
momentum.
is, look, I've said this before about Doge in particular, as somebody who grew up in the movement and have always been told, like, we support lower government and taxes to, I think your quote about Jordan is absolutely right. At some point, take 95%. This isn't like an 80% deal. This is a 95. We're actually really cutting spending. We're doing some real stuff on the border. I mean, this is real. And if you're a conservative that has been talking the talk for a long time, I get it's not 100%, but there's no way in a legislative body you're getting 100. And when you get north of 80, you're in territory of losing a good deal that furthers the principles that you've been articulating for decades.
I think the challenge is you're not helping the deficit, right? You're going to increase the deficit.
Well, no, but that's a whole separate argument. And I would argue, look, there's this internal thing about how CBO scores things dynamically or not, and whether or not the impact that tax cuts have. I am a firm believer that it's the people's money, and cutting taxes is good for the economy. It's good for growth. How they are scored is a bit ridiculous. And there's also this you want to go down a wonky rabbit hole. There's a difference between current policy and current law and how you score things. And it's green eye shade numbing. But the reality is that I think this is the right thing for the country. And it's the right thing for the economy. And it's the right thing for slowing the rate of growth.
Sean, there's one speaker school that says, don't go to the floor until you have the votes. There's another that says, go to the floor without the votes, use that as pressure. And if you have to pull the vote, pull the vote.
You have to go to the floor. Have to. You will never get the votes without going to the floor.
Never. Dan, do you agree?
I don't know. I mean, Nancy Pelosi was a master, to your point. She never brought it to the floor unless she had the votes. And McCarthy, part of his problem was he kept humiliating himself doing this. And then, he'd pull it at the last second. It's been a long time since you saw the Tom DeLays of the world hold that thing open for hours and break arms and ultimately get there.
Well, that's what I said the other day. It's going to get, this thing may be a 7-hour vote.
But you know what, though? But Johnson can't get him. You can hold it open in perpetuity. Trump is the only one who will have.
So this gets back to this gets back to the point. John, you can't take that bill to the floor if you've got more than 5. And I think they've got it down to 5 or less right now. 3 publicly, probably 2 or 3 more privately. That's when you bring it to the floor. If you're 10 or more, you can't, then you're screwed. But I think right now you put it on the floor, you call the White House first and say, Mr. President, we're going to go at 6 o'clock. And when we go, I'm going to need you to call these 3 people and just tell them that, we're breaking legs.
Well, and I think it's interesting. If you really care about this, I'd have JD Vance sitting up there in the House and you call them in one by one. You have, Don Jr. and Charlie Kirk sitting there on, FaceTime, and you look them in the eye and you say, we need this, right? But if he doesn't care, then you're not going to get there. So then you just let him humiliate himself and you go with the Senate.
Sean, what are you hearing about the effectiveness of the Emmer whip operation?
As Dan correctly pointed out, I think Tom DeLay was the last one that people feared.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about Europe for a minute. We played a ton of Macron last night on the show. Just a byplay with Trump was quite something. But Dan, if the Europeans are obviously doing a lot of strategizing amongst themselves, how would you describe what their strategy is to try to move Trump on the posture towards Ukraine and Russia?
Look, I think they've learned they are not publicly really picking fights. I mean, I know Macron touched him on the arm and kind of gently corrected him, which was striking. You don't see it very often, and Trump didn't explode where he could have. But I think they are trying to move him with flattery and with the kind of happy talk of we're all one team, we're allies. I think what they're getting towards is we'll lead with troops and money, but we need some sort of guarantee that you will play a supporting role. And that's tricky because once you agree to support, if they're not quite there, you could find yourself leading, in the front, not from behind. So I think they're trying their best to stay positive. The question is, will Trump make any commitment to support the peace?
Sean.
I mean, look, the fundamental question is when you said, what is Europe? That's the problem. It's not one person. It's several people, right? So you got Macron doing his thing. Starmer's coming in tomorrow from England. And I just don't think that they've got either the heft nor the clout nor the reputation or the commitment or the history to ask for much. It's just they're rather weak. They're coming hat in hand and saying, please, sir, could you give us another? And it's just, they don't have the clout either with Putin or with the United States. And that's why Trump isn't really caring about what their view is. I mean, he's listening to it. I thought Macron did a good job on Bret Baier last night, sort of deferentially and respectfully saying, President Trump, here's why we think you should do X, Y, and Z. But I don't think he really cares. And I think he bottom line knows that the only deal that's going to happen is if it's between him and Putin.
Okay.
But you know what though, Sean, when you say that they don't matter, the one place they matter, because Mark, you've made reference to this, is I don't think, and maybe Trump doesn't care, that he wants a peace deal that then collapses during his term, meaning Putin takes the rest of Ukraine. Yeah. So I mean, I think they do matter to him, but they don't at the same time.
Sean, do you think there's going to be a separate summits or one summit?
So look, this gets back to, the stagecraft. I think the Waltz / General Kellogg / Rubio, whatever, Witkoff, they'll lay the groundwork. And then Trump wants to be the one that's sitting at a table, shaking Putin's hand and saying, the war is over, peace is breaking out, and here's the deal.
I see the who was it that Bill Clinton had? Was it Yasser Arafat and
Camp David?
Where they shake hands and you have the icon. Like I think Trump would love some sort of summit where he sits there at 6'4" with his arms out, two short guys are shaking hands. Looks like dad over, his kids.
I don't think you're ever going to see that, but I agree with your point. I think he wants that moment, but I think it's only going to happen with Putin.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about Musk. There's a continued line from the media that this relationship is not long for the world, that Trump is going to tire of him, etc. I don't get that sense. I think Sean, based on his head shakes, agrees. This is a hard one to answer, I think, but Dan, did Musk have a good day or a bad day yesterday? Is this pattern of conflict, blind quotes from White House officials saying he's over his skis, being repudiated by other parts of the government? Is this good? Is this a good dynamic for him to be effective or bad?
I think yesterday was his first bad day, and I think it was two things. The fact that the Office of Personnel Management put out a memo saying you do not have to comply with this. And then Musk it clearly got Trump to say something. Musk then puts a second tweet out like, yes, you have to do this. And the Department of Homeland Security, no small department in the federal government, puts out words saying you are not going to comply with this. And I think that what's happening is it's pretty clear that Musk may be popular as an entrepreneur, as a kind of American success story, but I have not seen a poll or Mark, your focus group or anything that shows that Americans positively like the role he is playing as the head of Doge. And Musk seems to relish the spotlight. He loves mixing it up. He loves being on X, retweeting people, taunting, kind of owning the libs. And I think the more that he starts to be seen as an anchor personally, like I just wonder at what point Trump says, you're causing me problems. Like maybe not with MAGA, but you're beginning to see more and more Republicans speak out, like the guy Hearn from Oklahoma, who said, look, people just don't like him. Like those are that is a ruby red district. At what point do you say he's a problem for us?
I think that the irony is, like so many times the obvious is in front of everyone and they're missing it for the media. And they want to focus on the shiny nickel, which is Trump and Musk going to flip. And I think actually the opposite, which is you saw Trump last week, Saturday, maybe, or was it, talking about how I told Elon he needs to actually be tougher. And then Elon says, yes, daddy, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put out an email to the federal government and to say this. And then he kind of gets a brush back, Elon, that is. And then he puts out another email saying, now if you don't, I think Trump's trying to test Elon. He's trying to show, hey, look, remember who's in charge here. I am the president. I tell you what to do. You comply. So there's a little bit of that dynamic going on to make sure that Musk understands who's in charge. And Trump's reasserting the authority that he has, so that dynamic I actually think is the bigger one, which is that it's not fraying. It's actually more coming into it aligning correctly, which is that you work for me. I tell you what to do. I know that Trump actually and the thing that Dan keeps on describing is right. People like Trump loves it. You're the bad guy. You go out there, they're holding protests against you. They're burning you in effigy. And yet the base loves what is happening, right? That we're cutting government, that we're downsizing, getting rid of inefficiencies. And the members that are speaking out, I get it. I've heard this countless. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard it just individually. People are saying, I get that there's waste in the government. I'm glad that they're doing it, but I don't necessarily like how they're doing it. It's not the most humane way. We talked about this yesterday. There's a compassionate element to telling someone, hey, look, we're downsizing government. I know you have a mortgage, maybe a car payment and kids in school, but there's an element to which we can do two things. Because I made the point the other day, where's the compassion for the fact that we each as individuals own $100,000 in debt? No one seems to care about that. I care about that, but I also can care about another individual who happens to be a contractor or work for the federal government and don't want anything bad to happen to them or their family. And I think you're seeing these members of Congress say that. Rich McCormick said, I'm seeking a meeting with Musk. Murkowski has said a bunch in Alaska, which isn't a huge surprise. But then even some of these other folks are saying, I just want him to do this in a more compassionate, humane way. And that's why I think Trump actually likes it. He's the heat shield. He's taking all the bad hits, but Trump's getting the credit with the base for downsizing government.
But Sean, does Trump like that yesterday it looked like a little bit of a chaotic mess? Musk says one thing, OPM says another, Trump intervenes, for, daddy comes in to help, then DHS
doesn't care.
Doesn't care, okay.
Doesn't,
because I think it looks like a clown show.
Doesn't care.
He
can erase the clown show with a flip.
I'm just telling you, the people, and there's a Mark Penn poll, the Harvard.
Yeah, I saw that, the Harvard poll. Yeah.
And look, as far as, and we've talked about this before, the base is unbelievably excited about what he's doing at the border, what he's doing here. And so the manner, we talked about this with Ukraine, with Gaza, with everything else. Everyone's worried about the process. I think most people are saying, what's the end state? The end state's a smaller government, more effective, efficient government, an end of the war in Ukraine, cessation of fighting in Gaza, whatever, hostages back. Okay, I'll take a bunch of the chaos if you actually get hostages back, end of war, make our government more efficient and stop people illegally coming into the country. You know what? Because the last 4 years were kind of quiet and sleepy and nothing got done.
Let me say two things and then ask you a question. First of all, I was in a Green Bay diner yesterday. All they were talking about was how concerned they are about how upset Richard Haass is about remaking of Europe. People are very concerned about that.
In Green Bay, Wisconsin? Yeah.
Yes, they're very concerned. They said, I saw Haass on Morning Joe. He's very upset about the sensibilities of the Europeans are a little out of sorts. And the other thing they're very, very upset about is whether Elon Musk's emails are being returned. They're very concerned about that. Sarcasm aside, if the Democratic Party cannot score political points off of the number of veterans being fired, they should just fold up the tent.
They're starting to do it.
This is like the easiest thing in the world, because I can't tell you the number of Republicans who are upset about it, including Dan, your friend Jesse at Fox, like indiscriminately firing veterans who make up a very large percentage of the federal workforce. If the Democrats can make this an issue, again, fold up the tent.
Well, and that's, I mean, Mark just gave it away.
Sell the DNC building. Sorry, go ahead.
That to me is the funniest part about this is I'm not looking to help out the other side, but there's so many blatantly obvious things in front of them. And they're like, let's focus on Elon's email.
Right.
There's a misspelling in it. He didn't properly use the participle after.
Well, the only thing, you know what though, guys, I disagree a little bit here, because poll after poll shows that Musk is not popular. So what they're doing, but hold on. It's not a one trick only. I agree with you, Mark. What the veterans issue goes to is this indiscriminate nature of what they're doing, right? Again, it's starting to look chaotic and unorganized. And now you're seeing the departments are firing at each other. Ignore it. No, you can't. No, yes, we are.
Dan, I got to disagree with you. There's two categories of things, okay? There's things where you can change the policy and embarrass them and make them look craven and like they don't have the values of America. And there's things you can do that they'll just laugh at and say, I can't believe they're wasting time. I don't care. There's nothing they can say or do regarding Musk himself, as unpopular as he might be, that's going to affect change. It's just not going to happen.
Well, you know what? We will see. I mean, again, to me, it's not either or, right? I would not stop talking about Musk. And I've been one to say, focus on what, not the how and the who. But I agree with you, Mark. I would totally focus on what.
Here's why I disagree with you that it's not either or. If as soon as Democrats talk about Musk, it's all the blue media will cover because they're obsessed with covering it.
Yeah.
Have you seen a story in the New York Times about veterans who've been fired? I haven't.
In the last 24 hours, I bet you're going to see one in the next 24 hours because it's populating up through the ecosystem, online, in progressive websites and conservative websites, and usually the dominant media follows that water flow.
You've got.
I think you will.
Again, if these guys are smart, there's a bunch of left-leaning groups out there, veterans groups out there,
correct.
Iraq and Afghanistan, the vote vets that are
Seth Moulton. There's a bunch of people. Yep.
No, but my point is that's exactly. Don't get them. Let other people do your bidding. Yeah. Let these organizations, because NBC News would run a story without acknowledging that they're a left-leaning group and say, of veterans groups rallied in Washington today to denounce the cuts of President Trump and the preferences that veterans get in hiring. Like they will easily, but no one is serving that up for them yet.
Yeah.
But if they make it about Seth Moulton, it's a congressman who was a vet. I mean, it's so.
No, I hear he used to, prior to Congress, run a veterans group. That's why I said his name. Like that's.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Trump had 4 chiefs of staff in his first term, and all of them did their very, very best to manage the building. I've not read a single word about Susie Wiles and how she's managing Elon Musk. There's oblique references to it.
So can I take that up a notch? Because I thought about this last night. There hasn't been a single significant process story.
Correct.
Okay. So it's not just Susie. I mean, first of all, I will go back to your point, Mark. Susie gets the credit. So we'll lead with that. Leadership starts at the top. The idea that there is no Stephen Miller crapping on Caroline Leavitt, who's crapping on whatever, they are working as a team.
Correct.
I mean, honest to God, I will say this. I have said it publicly and I've said it privately now to some certain people. There's a jealousy factor in here because I look, I once in a while was on a plane this weekend or on Friday, and I will once in a while look back at photos from 2017, 2016, just to see what was going on. And a lot of times I screenshot things, stories, whatever, that I'll keep my photos just to remember a story that happened on a day. And I'm looking back through some of the stories in Politico that were unbelievably outrageously false and ridiculous, but just sort of pitting people against each other. Some true, many largely false. but there's not one single process story of significance.
Right.
And I say that because there might be one, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah.
Hitting groups against each other.
The exception is a regular drumbeat of blind quote paragraphs about Musk, of people saying White House officials are upset at Musk. We've seen that almost daily now for 10 days.
Well,
in
it's
one
been
paper
reported
magazine.
that Wiles twice has met with, she hasn't confirmed it, but it has been reported she has twice met with Elon about better coordinating with the White House.
Correct. This is the one thing
Yep.
that's the exception, Sean, to your great point. But
yeah, I mean,
for the most part, we haven't seen this. But
yeah.
I'm curious to see, because we're getting to the point where the way Musk has been operating is probably not sustainable exactly like this. That's my sense from the Hill and from certain people in the administration, that yes, we want to get off to a fast start. Yes, everybody's still trying to figure out what they're doing. Yes, we're waiting for cabinet secretaries to be confirmed. But now you've got these cabinet secretaries in there, some of their deputies, there's confirmation hearings going on today. Like, some of this is about good government or what the right thing for the president is, but some of it is just pure territorial. And I think you saw that with some of these agency heads and cabinet secretaries who pushed back on the 5 things you did last week email. They're like, this is my department. I'll run this department. I'll work with the president about who's going to work here, not Elon Musk freelancing with no notification. So I do think we're entering a different phase, and I'll be curious to see how Susie and others manage it.
Mark, would you guys say, because you guys know her better than I do, but my sense is she moves in the shadows when she wants to execute something, meaning if Musk starts to become unpopular, is it more likely that the conservative ecosystem starts to blurt, kind of become somewhat critical? Like, is that how they try to get the note to him that, like, it's time for you to move on rather than confronting him?
It's all up to Trump as far as I'm concerned.
All
right, last topic. Sean, what is the future of MSNBC in the wake of what happened yesterday? Like, where are they headed?
So there's a bunch of questions within that, because I felt the whole thing to be weird in the last 24 hours. Like, they got rid of Joy Reid, but then they're basically like, we're talking to Eugene Daniels, who I got to imagine is pretty much, I don't really understand the difference between a Eugene Daniels and a Joy Reid.
Cheaper.
That's exactly
right. But then you're keeping Rachel Maddow to hang out. I mean, like, dude, I'll tell you what, if I can get $25 to work one day a week, she's getting $25 million to work one day a week and do like documentary consulting. I'm really not sure. I don't know that that's sustainable, but
well, she's not getting that deal again when it comes up.
Fine. But I don't know that MSNBC will be around to give it to her. I think that there is definitely a decline in, I mean, what I find fascinating is they're going to be spun off. And then what's that model look like? Is there enough advertising to sustain it? It's an unsustainable model to me. There's not enough viewers. They've lost advertising. They have a very bloated high. I mean, I think you're right. They're going to come in. Somebody told me yesterday, and I don't know if this is true or not, but like, they were like, the beauty of the ESPN Sports Center model was that you had a bunch of people telling you the news, but there wasn't one, like, there were, once in a while somebody would get above their britches and they get kind of cut. Right now they've got to figure out, like, they're going to bring in, I think, a lot of cheaper folks. They replaced Joy with like Michael Steele and Alicia Menendez. Like, it's just, we're going to bring in cheaper talent.
Simone Sanders. Yep.
Simone Sanders, and just try to I guess that's the answer, until you get spun off and somebody buys you. But the question is, who buys you? And do the person that buys you buy into that model? And I just don't think it's sustainable. That's my thing. The thing that I will say is a tangential to this is my addiction is still prevalent, that I have to watch most morning shows. I cannot believe, considering the environment that we're in now, how bad CNN is doubling down on that model of like going further and further to the far left. It blows my mind that after what's happening at MSNBC, CNN is following them down a very bad rabbit hole.
Well,
I'm amazed.
I don't know.
I still wonder if that's happening from the top or just like organically. Dan.
Yeah, I think MSNBC is going younger and cheaper, and they're going to try to go more progressive with former officials from government. So Jen Psaki, Simone Sanders, people who can get guests people who are plugged into the progressive world and, become more, try to be, look at all the former Republican officials at Fox. I think MSNBC is going for this younger, cheaper talent that they think is going to be able to make more news because they can get people out of the progressive world to, come on, their friends, etc. So, Sean, to your point, is there a business model there? Democrats have tried, talk radio, they've tried cable. Now
the
they're
problem with
talking
cable
about
is that
podcasts.
your average viewer is 67, 68 years old, right? I mean, there's only so, I mean, not to be crass, but the viewership is dying. And so the problem is you have to get cheaper, but how much cheaper can you get as your audience fades?
Well, look, they want to try to get younger. I mean, this is the race of all linear networks, which is how do you attract younger viewers who increasingly get their news from TikTok and, podcasts versus cable. Two-way. Sorry, first two-way, then a pod. Right, correct. Sorry.
Dan, tell me 3 things you would do if you took over MSNBC today.
Oh, geez. Hire two-way, put the morning meeting on in prime time. I think the format of shows hasn't changed in 30 years. I think I would look at things like ESPN, where Pat McAfee and Stephen A. Smith and others have found success, and try to translate that into politics. Don't do the opening monologue for 8 minutes and then just the static interviews about the reconciliation. Bring people in who are going to mix it up. I'd put Stephen A. Smith on to talk politics from 8 to 9. I mean, people would watch it. Put Charles Barkley on. Don't do the cookie cutter same stuff and expect a different result.
Well, I think the funny thing about the Fox model is that you look both at the 5 and then at Gutfeld show at night. Yep. I mean, and that show's outpacing the other network shows at that. It's just, I think part of this is you're right, Dan. The model is outdated, and it's they literally just beat the drum over and over again with the same thing, different face.
Yep. Sean, 3 things you would do if you were in charge of CNN.
Ooh.
I would fire most everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I would
hire the morning meeting.
Yep. Start actually there. That would be the easiest thing. We just go all across the linear
right,
thing.
We're right in the middle.
I'd bring back Robin Meade to do headline news. She was one of my favorites. And then to your point, to Dan's point, I would look at the whole format. And I actually think that there is a niche. I will confess that I am a contributor at News Nation, but I think that the idea that where CNN strayed, and I don't know, you'd have to look at the internals, but there is a desire, I think, for people to just want to have TV on in the back that tells them the news without all of the left-wing commentary. And I think getting back to that and maybe mixing in some things in the evening would be better. So I think, to me, where they're missing the potential audience, because all you need is 400,000 to 600,000 people to be quasi-successful in this area. And so I think that's where I would go. And where CNN has actually done well is succeeded on the digital side, and that's where they should continue to focus.
Mark, I'll add one point, because now I'm thinking about this more. I would stop trying to deliver news, and I would become more entertainment. Because it's like sports scores. And go to my phone and get the hardcore news anywhere. Entertain people. That's part of the problem. They don't there's nothing unique about it. There's nothing different. So I would look for people who are entertaining versus let me read the teleprompter.
Yeah, people are watching personality. I mean, that's exactly the reality. Wait, when I flip around a show or the TV or whatever, I look and say, is that person interesting? Is it a good guest? Is it somebody who I think you're right. I mean, it's got to be somebody who you want to sort of be entertained by.
I mean, look at Pat McAfee. He's in a white beater. His hat's backwards. He's leaning on his arm on a stool, standing up. He's walking around. It's entertaining. It's not sitting at a microphone with the tie on, talking about, get some life. Have some fun with this stuff.
Peace, love, and understanding precludes me from asking you if you really wanted to say wife beater.
I was going to tell you, we in our household, Douglas,
welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are, what that backdrop is, and what's on your mind.
Ooh.
I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and that's actually a scene from last week when we had our our snow event. So
beautiful.
Anyway, just a little bit of historical perspective vis-a-vis Doge. I think, and I understand it's chaotic, it's messy, et cetera. And, if it doesn't work due to the chaos, that's not great. However, directionally, I think that what Trump and Doge are trying to do is keep not only the promises that he made, in the campaign of 2024, but the promises that FDR made in the campaign of 1932. And I hear a quote from the platform, and Dan's smiling probably because he knows this. 1932, we advocate, one, an immediate and drastic reduction of governmental expenditures by abolishing useless commissions and offices, consolidating departments and bureaus, and eliminating extravagance to accomplish a saving of not less than 25% the cost of the federal government. Two, maintenance of the national credit by a federal budget annually balanced on the basis of accurate executive estimates within revenues. Three, a sound currency to be preserved at all hazards. We condemn four, this will be my last one. We condemn for the open and covert resistance of administrative officials to every effort made by congressional committees to control the extravagant expenditures of the government. So, I think
that's awesome. I didn't know that.
And that's a platform, there's your new Democratic platform, Dan, if you want to really invent things. But I think Trump should come out and say, not only did I steal these great Democrats away from the Democratic Party, RFK, Tulsi, not only am I, releasing the JFK assassination files, I'm reinvigorating FDR's original vision. And the fact is, I think when you look, historically different points, the New Deal certainly being one of them. And by the way, there's a good book called The New Deal's War on Civil Liberties, which, is strikingly relevant to the Biden administration, especially, I think. But mass surveillance, going on there, suppression of, newspapers, et cetera. But I think that, basically, the river has jumped its banks a number of times, constitutionally speaking, in our history, but it's always been in the direction of expanding federal government.
Douglas, thank you. Dan, and then Sean.
Look, Douglas, I did not know that about FDR. That's an awesome set of quotes. Bill Clinton, obviously, and Al Gore. Al Gore was in charge of it, targeting, Mark, what was the title they gave it?
Reinventing government.
Reinventing government. They did.
AK Rigo.
Yeah. Okay. They did make some cuts. And look, I agree with you. There's one of the big questions that Democrats ask is, how did we not think of this ourselves? And how, have we been so blind to what is an obviously popular and necessary thing to do, which is to kind of be more efficient and audit spending. And so I agree with you. This is a smart play. I think in principle, Americans support this. How this goes about is part of the question. And once you move beyond fat, now it's going to get interesting. 88% of the federal budget is defense and Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. They haven't touched it yet.
Not yet. However, Trump is saying, the US, Russia, and China should cut our defense expenditures by 50%. And that may sound very pipe dreamy, but I don't know if any of you guys listen to the All In podcast, with the Silicon Valley masters of the universe who, chat amongst themselves. But they were talking about, some of the startups that they've invested in, or at least some of them in their little clique, are talking about, they were literally saying, a couple of weeks ago, we can bring down, we can modernize our defense and basically do it for half the price.
Look, it's always been the case. We've talked about this before. The ultimate example is military defense contracting is not all sitting in one, area. It is in congressional districts of congressional leaders. They will fight tooth and nail. That is not a Democratic thing. Most of them are in Republican districts.
Sean.
So I think it's interesting that you bring. I was glad to hear you talk about FDR because I've played the clips from Obama and Clinton and Gore. It's just funny. Again, I think this goes back to so many other things. it's how you present them, right? And I think that's where we talked about this earlier. That's the hit mostly on Elon, how he's handling it, how he's executing it, putting out emails and saying, you'll be fired if this happens. There's general widespread agreement. I mean, Democrats literally every time I hear them come on TV say, we can all agree the federal government's bloated and inefficient. And my answer is, okay, well, you didn't do anything. But if we've already got them at hello and we can just maybe change the tactic and the marketing piece of it, if you will, then I think we can be much more successful. So that's the irony of this, is that I think that the only thing that's prohibiting, this from being more successful is maybe being a little bit more surgical and marketing it better, because the American people are there. The examples that President Trump and his team have cited have been fantastic. So I get it. I mean, this is not a new thing. What I think is different is him actually executing on it. It's one thing to talk about the waste. It's another thing to get rid of it. And where I think that this administration is really starting to show is that we're actually just going to do it. But as I've used countless examples in the past, part of it is at some point, if you've acknowledged that there's a problem for decades and you've done nothing about it, you can't really criticize the guy who finally gets to the bottom of it. And that's the problem right now for people who are trying to criticize Trump, is that they've known about it, they were aware of it, they did nothing, and now it's hard to be like, okay, well, we just don't like how you're doing it. But I think the more that Republicans can cite, I mean, I know you were offering that up to Dan, but I think we can take it too, and just start saying, as FDR said, as Clinton said, I would think that would be smart.
Yeah. Douglas, thank you. Appreciate you coming in. Grateful to you.
We're going to see if the courts uphold this power, by the way. I mean, that's $1 million question hanging out there, is can the president choose not to spend what Congress has appropriated? It's an outstanding question.
Yeah. Bennett, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind, please.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm in Washington, D.C., don't work in politics. And I grew up in politics, but this was the first election I voted in. So I'm 28, so I guess I skipped like 16, 20 and midterms.
Who did you vote for? Did you vote for Trump?
Yes. I kind of liked him in 16, but I was in school in Virginia and didn't think he was going to win. So I didn't really think the vote mattered. And then in 20, I was like pretty angry that I felt like he didn't do a lot of what he actually ran on. And then I kind of thought this one was like kind of the best of, I thought he was better than Harris. And I was like, well, I probably need to start voting if I feel strongly about something.
Bennett, are you from a family of Democrats, Republicans, or something else?
Republicans. I'm from Kentucky. My dad ran campaigns and then was general counsel to the governor and then served on the Supreme Court of Kentucky for a while. So most of my childhood was a lot of campaigning and stuff like that. So
we should be calling you Prince Bennett.
Yeah.
So I had kind of a bad taste for politics for like quite a while, just because, that's like all we did. That was like all the weekends and stuff was kind of like politics. So
is your godfather Mitch McConnell?
I don't think we're the biggest Mitch McConnell fans.
Okay.
But
all right.
That goes back to some personal stories. So we can
Feel
leave.
free.
Yeah, keep talking. Go ahead.
No, so I don't know, probably Republicans in Kentucky that aren't the biggest fan of his. That goes back kind of a long ways ago. I normally am not available to be on, so I got a lot of thoughts flooding. I guess I kind of have one question that kind of, I don't know, like kind of spurred me getting back interested in politics. And it kind of, the baseline of the question is, am I crazy or not? And when I was in college was kind of like when Russiagate happened. And I got really invested into it. And I read every single like deposition, every hearing, read the Mueller report, read all the other reports. And I guess it kind of put something in my head about like, kind of the idea of like our intel agencies or like the military. And I guess it kind of goes to like foreign policy and what's going on in Ukraine right now. And just like the whole idea of if some of these, like especially the intel or counter-terrorist agencies are kind of like too unchecked from like the actual government. And I know you guys have been in government and reported on it. And, people say the deep state, and I like to think like I'm intelligent and like sometimes not a conspiracy theorist. But I think like when I try and think about those type of agencies and stuff, like I kind of have doubts and kind of lean towards thinking that there's a deep state, but I kind of don't want to think that. So I kind of just am asking, like, am I crazy for like kind of having those thoughts that like they can kind of run wild and not really do what elected officials like tell them to do?
Sean.
No, you're not crazy. I think there are different reasons. There's, there's a lack of oversight. I mean, some of it's not as nefarious as some people would argue. I mean, it's just there are bureaucrats that have been, because they've been there a long time, and there's not a ton of oversight that sort of, run crazy with enforcement or coming up with new. I mean, so yes, I think the one thing like I said, my issue is that there's some really bad people, but then there's just a lot of bureaucrats that think that they're empowered to do whatever they want and don't answer to anybody and aren't accountable.
Dan.
Well, I think most agencies are trying to do their job. Where the kind of spying apparatus really grew rapidly was after 9/11, and the country made a decision that we didn't know, what was out there. We felt like we were not, dots had not been connected and that things had fallen through the cracks. And so money was pumped into the spying and security services. And look, even, we could talk all day about it, but the reason they looked into the Russia issue was the Russians were trying to interfere in the election. That's what started. Then the question became, was it coordinated? Was it solicited? And that's where kind of the politics of this exploded. But we would want our intelligence agencies to be looking to see how are people trying to interfere in our country, whether it's our politics, businesses, intellectual property, or whatnot. That's good. Like, that's why we have them, and why we kind of poke around overseas to try to protect this country. So I believe most bureaucrats do the right thing. They're good people. They work hard. Do sometimes they do things that in retrospect we cringe at or get out of control? Absolutely. There is oversight. You don't hear about it because a lot of that happens behind closed doors. Like, literally, they are non-public hearings. Their budget is not public. And the hearings are private. In fact, they're in secure rooms where staff can't enter, cell phones can't enter. It's called the SCIF. It's in the basement of the US Capitol. It is like going into Fort Knox if you walk by it. So I believe they try their best to keep us safe.
Yeah, Bennett, I'll take a position closer to Sean's. The bureaucracy of the intelligence agencies are like the other bureaucracies at HUD or energy or agriculture. They want to protect their turf. But there's three additional elements to the intelligence community. Number one, they have access to tools and to information that they can use to fight their bureaucratic battles that make them more dangerous. Number two, they are fierce. They are determined to protect their prerogatives in a way that is at least as fierce as any other department. And finally, they have the advantage of less scrutiny because they can always hide behind claims of national security, even for members of Congress, even for other parts of the executive branch. So I am deeply suspicious of them and deeply sympathetic to those who say there needs to be more oversight, there needs to be more regulation, there needs to be more transparency. Otherwise, I think they're a danger to civil liberties and to our democracy.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I feel like that's kind of where I am. And it's like the oversight is like, I don't know how you guys feel. And I know it's like provocative and for show, but it's like whenever there's like an interesting oversight hearing that's actually something that I care about and like want to get information, it's almost like it's not even oversight and it's more for like a 5-minute clip on YouTube or Twitter that, they're not even asking like the real questions. They're just trying to like make a scene. So
yes, sir.
The one thing I'll just say to Mark's point, it's a very hard thing to have oversight of, because if you bring someone human intelligence or signal intelligence and say, here's what we want to do, it's hard to say, well, like, let's go talk to that individual, or let's go. It's you have to take not just their word for it, but their analysis of it, right? So if I trust a human source in China that's telling me X, Y, and Z, and we saw this a little on the WMD world, but like at some point, I have to trust that you've vetted them, that you actually believe them to be correct. I mean, it's not the normal kind of thing where you can walk into somebody's job and say, show me that widget was actually put on the counter, and I look at it and I see it and I verify it and I go, okay, you're trusting these individuals, their analysis and their sources and their methods in a way that you can't go say, let me go talk to that person or let me go look at it because the nature of what they do is highly classified.
Yeah. Bennett, thank you for coming in, man. Come back regularly.
Yeah, great question.
Pat, get your relatives on to tell some McConnell stories next time. Bring them with you. All right, let's bring in two folks at once. Sometimes like to do that, mix things up. It adds a little cayenne pepper to two-way. So here's Kevin and here's Tim. Kevin, you first tell folks where you are, what's on your mind, and then Tim, and then we'll answer them both.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm from the Midwest. I'm a former Democrat. At one point, I called myself a Bernie bro, proudly. But at this point, I'm ready to vote blue no matter who, pretty much.
Blue or red?
Blue.
Blue. Okay.
Yeah. So I find, besides the quick wins we see with Doge regards to USAID cuts, I think largely everything else has been totally incompetent. So, I mean, that's where I can start. I don't know if you want to introduce Tim as well.
Sure. And you don't want to tell us specifically where you are, just the Midwest.
Yeah, generally Midwest
All
is
right.
fine.
Good to hear. Tim.
How you guys doing? I'm actually the uncle to the great Fletcher, who you had on last week.
Oh my
And I'm the
goodness,
brother.
the whole family's
family's
gonna be
Like I
here.
said, yeah.
Where do you live in Michigan also, Tim?
I'm from Michigan, but I live in Mexico City.
All right. Well, glad to have you here. What's on your mind?
Well, I was actually I come from the different perspective. I was a Democrat, and I was very much disenchanted by the last 4 years. And this program, amongst others, helped me look at Trump through a different perspective. And especially what Sean was talking about earlier, which was focused less on the words and more about what the end game and what's the strategy behind it. And that's one of the things I think I've gotten from this program most of all. And I guess what was on my mind is we've talked a lot about Zelensky and Europe and what the strategy might be behind Trump softening up Zelensky. And I wonder if it has something more to do with a U.S. strategic interest that he sees in peeling Russia away from China and pulling off a reverse Nixon.
Yeah.
To reduce China's strength in the region and the world and basically returning the United States to a realist foreign policy as opposed to this neoliberalist policy that spreads democracy everywhere. I wonder if Sean, especially since you know him best of all, if you think Trump operates in that manner, or that might be too, I don't know, academic.
All right, Tim, hold on. That's a great question, and Sean will answer in a second. Kevin, is your question like? Well, you said you're skeptical of Doge. Did you have a question, or do you just want to put that topic on the table?
Generally, put the comment on the table, and I was listening to the show last night with Hogan in regards to the Forest Service layoffs, and I just find that to be like totally objectionable. Probationary workers are not only people who were hired within the last year, it's anybody who's been promoted recently. So any kind of systemic layoff that, results in laying off people who have just been promoted or have just and blanket firing anybody hired within the last year, I think it's just total incompetency. I happen to know one of the Forest Service workers, and to think that the job he had could have been automated, and I think that was the suggestion yesterday, is just totally absurd. So that's largely what I wanted to say.
All right, well, go ahead, go Dan on that, and then Sean can respond to Tim.
Look, I mean, that is one of the things that is so hard about what's happening with Doge is, as we talked about earlier, generally speaking, people would say the government needs to be trimmed and it needs to do more with less and be more efficient. But to your point, Kevin, it's not just whether the way they're going about it is ridiculous, because no private company would ever operate like that, ever. Again, if you're going to do layoffs, you tend to go for the top that is more expensive for middle management. You bring up the cheaper, hungrier, more nimble, younger workers. But the second thing is there's so much misinformation out there. I will just, in my opinion, a lot of what they're saying are blanket lies to market success. They want to win a headline. They need something every day to point to, because as Sean said, the base loves it. So I give this, example all the time. 5 million becomes 500 million becomes 5 billion by the end of the day. If you added up what Musk and Trump constantly said, they've cut like $100 trillion out of a $2 trillion budget in 2 months. They've laid off all these people, and it's unbelievable. The reality is so much less has been cut. a dollar cut is a dollar earned is good. But to your point, it is like a misinformation war on steroids.
Sean,
right,
on reverse Nixon.
Yeah.
Or on that,
So
on that
first,
too.
just to Tim, I don't know. I think that there is something to the strategy. I think Karl Rove alluded to some of this later, but I would just, as I've said a couple times, one, pump the brakes. Let's see what the outcome is. For 4 years, I mean, I honestly can't think of a single true effort to end the war. Not one proposed meeting, nothing. So at the end of the day, I want less people dying, and I want to stop spending a ton of money on a war that we're not even giving them the proper tools to win. Okay. So if this tactic works and gets us to an end state that is a cessation of killing and destruction, then I'm for it. Is there more to a strategy? Sometimes, I've laughed, he's over the years, he'll say, oh, you realize if I do this. And so sometimes it's really well thought of. Sometimes it's, it's happening as it goes. I don't know, because I'm not privy to that, but I do think that there's a little bit of personal with Zelensky that's pretty obvious. And then there's a little bit of, I want to be the guy that gets the deal. And that is something that in the back of your mind, you have to understand. He wants peace. Like, he wants a very stable, peaceful world. That is what he seeks, during his presidency. He wants to have that to be a recurrence from the first term. So, we'll know in 2 weeks, is maybe 3 or something like that. But my point is, I can't answer Tim and say I 100% know that this is the real plan. But he definitely, there is some method to the madness. And then with respect to Kevin, I would just argue this. I get the chaotic nature to some degree of this Doge thing, but we talked about this yesterday. In the past, this is how this normally plays out in Washington. Memo, dear GS 12s to 14s, please do a 6-month study of the following analysis regarding the people who have worked for you over the last 6 years. Compare that with the OMB guidance that was put out in 1976. Then create a PowerPoint presentation. The folks from Booz Allen Hamilton will be there to provide you some administrative help on the PowerPoint. Those PowerPoints will be reviewed in 18 months. At the end of 18 months, we will throw all this work in the trash. And then 10 years later, we will revive that work.
Bring up the union. You got to bring up the union.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then we'll probably still face some backlash because the union is upset that the 8.5 by 11 paper wasn't put on the proper bond level. So we will begin that process again. So that's how Washington normally works, and nothing gets done. And so I think Elon sees it, he recognizes it, and he goes, you know what? We're going to go in, we're going to do it my way, and we're going to get results, and we're going to come out and we'll kind of fix it at the end, meaning we'll fire these people. We might have some bumps along the way. We'll bring back the right people, but in that process, but the other way doesn't work, and it never has, and it never will. So maybe we try it my way and see if we can actually make some progress.
Kevin and Tim, I couldn't appreciate more the serious and a good way attitude you brought to your topic. So thank you for that. I got a question for each of you before we have to go. Kevin, is that how you wore your hair when you were a Bernie bro?
Yeah, just about. I used to cut my hair back in the day myself, so it was never looking too good.
All right. I was thinking ponytail, but Tim, which member of the family have we not had on yet? Like, who's coming up next?
That's a great question.
Because we want everybody. We want the whole family.
You got to have the whole
cousins.
family. I think you might get Tiffany's husband. I think that might be a good one.
All right, where does he live?
He lives in Grosse Pointe as well.
Okay,
we're gonna have to have a family conversation after this and not, choose the best candidate.
Maybe all of you come on tonight. We'll have a group, like a family reunion. Thank you both, Tim and Kevin. I'm really grateful to you both for coming on. Please come back.
Or thank you guys for what you do. From Grosse Pointe.
We could do a live show from Grosse Pointe. Give our best to your nephew too. We like him. He's a good man. All right. Sean, what's coming up on your show at 6 tonight?
Senator Marsha Blackburn and the head of the Freedom Caucus, Andy Harris of Maryland. So we're going to talk a little bit about the holdouts, the votes, and what it's going to take to get them on board.
All right. On my show tonight, I thought I was having Richie Torres, but because there are votes this evening at around 6, we've had to reschedule. We'll have Congressman Torres on another time. If you want to know who's be joining me on 2-way tonight, watch my X feed for more information as developments warrant. Thanks to y'all for watching. Great questions today. Appreciate it. And we'll see you right here tomorrow on the morning meeting, 9 a.m. Bye-bye.